What you seek is seeking you, but not in the way social media sells it to you. Not like a wish floating out into the universe and boomeranging back wrapped in a bow. It's quieter than that, more uncomfortable, more honest, and a lot more personal. Because most of what we say we're seeking, belonging, love, peace, purpose, healing, isn't lost somewhere outside of us. It's responding to what we're willing to face inside. True seeking begins within, even though everything in us has been conditioned to look outward first. From an early age, we're taught that answers live somewhere beyond us, inside achievements, relationships, approval, or future milestones. We learn to measure our worth by what we can collect, impress, or control. So when we feel empty, restless, or disconnected, our instinct is to search harder outside ourselves, assuming we just haven't tried enough yet. But that kind of seeking often leaves us exhausted rather than fulfilled, because it asks the world to give us what only self-awareness can reveal. Real seeking asks a different kind of question. Not what is missing from my life, but what part of me have I been ignoring? Discomfort is often the first clue. The unease we try to silence with busyness, distractions, or constant productivity is usually our inner voice asking for attention. True seeking begins when we stop numbing that voice and start listening, even when what we hear challenges the stories we've built about who we are supposed to be. Looking inward isn't about obsession or self-criticism. It's about curiosity rooted in compassion. It means noticing your patterns without shaming yourself for having them. It means asking why certain situations drain you, why some relationships feel heavy, why success sometimes feels hollow. These questions aren't signs of failure, they are signs that your inner world is asking to be acknowledged, and acknowledgement is where growth starts. Many of us avoid inner seeking because it requires us to sit with uncertainty. There are no instant answers, no clear timeline, no external validation that we're doing it right. Turning inward can bring up grief for what we didn't receive, anger for boundaries we didn't know how to set, and fear about who we might become if we stop living according to expectations. Yet avoiding that discomfort doesn't protect us. It keeps us stuck repeating the same patterns while hoping for different outcomes. When we begin seeking within, we start reclaiming responsibility for our inner lives. Not blame, but responsibility. We realize that while we didn't choose our wounds, we do have a choice in how we respond to them. We learn to recognize the difference between intuition and fear, between self-protection and self-abandonment. This awareness slowly shifts how we move through the world. We stop chasing things to prove our worth and start choosing experiences that align with it. What's powerful about inner seeking is that it changes how the external world meets us. When we understand ourselves, we choose relationships rooted in honesty rather than approval. We pursue goals that feel meaningful instead of merely impressive. We learn to leave situations that cost us our sense of self. The outside doesn't magically become easier, but it becomes clearer. And clarity changes everything. True seeking is not a dramatic turning point, it's a quiet practice. It's pausing before reacting. It's noticing when you're shrinking. It's choosing truth over comfort again and again. Over time, this inward attention becomes grounding. You realize that what you've been searching for isn't something to be found someday. It's something to be remembered. True seeking begins within because that is where alignment lives. And when you come home to yourself, the world stops feeling like something you have to chase and starts feeling like something you can finally meet. Vulnerability is the doorway, even though everything in us wants to believe the opposite. We're taught that staying guarded keeps us safe. That strength is about having answers, control, and unshakable confidence. So we learn to wear armor. We curate our words, dull our emotions, avoid saying what we actually feel, and present versions of ourselves that seem acceptable, capable, and together. The problem is, the very walls we build to protect ourselves also block the things we long for most. Vulnerability isn't weakness. It's the courage to be honest without knowing how that honesty will be received. It's speaking before the outcome is guaranteed, loving without assurances, showing up without a script. And that kind of openness feels risky because it invites exposure. It asks us to be seen not just for what we do well, but for what still hurts, what we're still learning, and what we can't control. So many of us say we want connection, belonging, and love, but we approach them from behind masks. We share selectively. We hint instead of state. We minimize our needs so we won't be seen as too much. We tell ourselves we're being low maintenance, independent, or realistic, when in truth we're afraid. Afraid of rejection, disappointment, or confirming the belief that we are not enough as we are. But connection doesn't respond to perfection or self-sufficiency. It responds to authenticity. Vulnerability is the doorway because it's the only way others can actually meet us. When we armor up, people don't reject our true selves, they never even see them. And over time, this creates a different kind of pain, the loneliness of being surrounded yet unseen. We may look strong on the outside, but inside we are starving for the kind of connection that only truth can create. Being vulnerable doesn't mean oversharing or having no boundaries. It means choosing honesty wisely. It means saying, "This matters to me. I don't have it figured out," or "That hurt," even when your voice shakes. It means allowing yourself to be flawed and present instead of polished and distant. Vulnerability is not about giving everything away. It's about not abandoning yourself in the name of being liked or accepted. There's also vulnerability in allowing joy, in admitting hope, in believing something good could happen even after being disappointed before. Many people protect themselves not just from pain, but from longing because longing makes us care, and caring makes us feel alive. Vulnerability opens the door to disappointment, yes, but it also opens the door to meaning. Walking through that doorway changes how you experience the world. You begin to notice who can meet you with respect and who cannot. You learn that rejection, while painful, is often information, not a verdict on your worth, but clarity about compatibility. When you stop hiding, you stop chasing approval and start building relationships grounded in mutual honesty. At its core, vulnerability is a practice of trust. Not trust that nothing will go wrong, but trust in your ability to survive emotionally if it does. It's choosing to believe that your truth deserves space, even if it costs you something. Because the cost of staying armored is a life lived at a distance from yourself and others. Vulnerability is the doorway because anything real, love, connection, healing, belonging, requires you to step through it. And once you do, you realize the doorway was never about becoming exposed. It was about finally being free. Peace does not come from avoiding discomfort, even though avoidance is often sold to us as self-care. We're told to stay positive, keep the calm, don't upset the balance, don't make things awkward. So we learn to swallow words, ignore red flags, and stay silent to keep everything looking smooth on the surface. But what looks like peace from the outside often feels like tension, exhaustion, and self-betrayal on the inside. Avoidance may reduce conflict in the moment, but it quietly drains our sense of integrity over time. Integrity is the alignment between what we feel, what we believe, and how we act. When those pieces are out of sync, our nervous system notices, even if our mind tries to explain it away. That persistent tightness in the chest, the low-level anxiety we can't name, the resentment that builds without a clear target, those are often signals that we're living out of alignment. We're ignoring what we know to be true in order to keep things comfortable or familiar. Avoidance asks us to abandon parts of ourselves, not all at once, but slowly. We tell ourselves it's not worth the argument, that it's easier to let it go, that speaking up won't change anything anyway. And sometimes those thoughts sound reasonable. But repeated over time, they teach us that our voice doesn't matter, our needs are negotiable, and our boundaries are optional. That's not peace, that's erosion. Peace rooted in integrity feels different. It's not always calm. Sometimes it's noisy, awkward, or uncomfortable. It may involve hard conversations, disappointing people, or being misunderstood. But it carries a deeper sense of steadiness because it's built on self-respect. When you act in alignment with your values, your body relaxes, even if the situation itself is tense, because you're no longer fighting yourself. Integrity-based peace requires honesty, especially in moments when silence feels safer. It asks you to name what you feel without aggression or apology. It asks you to set boundaries without excessive explanation. It also asks you to tolerate the discomfort that comes when other people don't like those boundaries. That discomfort can feel dangerous, especially if you've learned to equate harmony with love. But real harmony doesn't demand self-erasure. One of the hardest shifts is realizing that avoiding conflict does not prevent pain, it just delays it and concentrates it inside. The unspoken words don't disappear, they settle into our bodies as stress, resentment, and fatigue. Over time, avoidance can turn into bitterness, not because we're angry people, but because we've consistently chosen external peace over internal truth. Peace earned through integrity may cost relationships that only survive on silence. It may change dynamics we worked hard to maintain. But it also creates space for relationships that can hold honesty, complexity, and growth. And even when it leads to loss, it brings clarity. You no longer wonder who you are allowed to be, because you're being that person in real time. Peace isn't the absence of tension. It's the absence of self-betrayal. It comes from knowing that when it mattered, you chose honesty over comfort and alignment over approval. That kind of peace doesn't always feel soothing, but it is deeply stabilizing. And once you experience it, you realize it was never silence you were craving. It was integrity. Purpose doesn't wait for readiness, even though we often tell ourselves it should. We say we'll begin once we're more confident, more healed, more certain. Once we have the credentials, the plan, the reassurance that we won't fail. Readiness becomes a moving target, always just out of reach, because it feels safer to prepare than to risk being seen trying. But purpose is not drawn to perfection or certainty. It responds to courage. Courage, in this sense, isn't fearlessness. It's choosing to move forward while fear is still present. It's taking the step before clarity arrives, speaking before the voice feels steady, beginning before you feel equipped. If purpose waited for readiness, nothing meaningful would ever begin. Growth requires entry, and entry requires a willingness to be unfinished. Many people confuse readiness with worthiness. They believe they have to become a certain version of themselves before they are allowed to pursue what calls to them. But purpose doesn't ask you to prove your value, it reveals it through action. You discover what you're capable of only after you step into the experience, not before. Waiting to feel ready often keeps us stuck in a cycle of self-doubt disguised as responsibility. Purpose chooses courage because courage is evidence of commitment. When you act despite uncertainty, you're telling yourself that your inner call matters more than your fear of failure or judgment. That decision reshapes your identity. You stop seeing yourself as someone who is almost or someday, and start becoming someone who shows up, imperfect, nervous, and learning in real time. There is also a cost to waiting. The longer we delay, the more we normalize inaction. We train ourselves to ignore the quiet pull toward meaning, chalking it up to impracticality or timing. Over time, that voice doesn't disappear, but it does grow heavier, often resurfacing as frustration, restlessness, or regret. Purpose that is ignored rarely leaves us at peace. It lingers, reminding us of what we didn't dare to attempt. Choosing courage doesn't mean reckless leaps or blind faith. It means honest assessment paired with forward movement. Small actions taken consistently matter more than grand plans waiting for the perfect moment. Courage can look like a conversation, an application, a boundary, or choosing to be seen doing something new. These steps might not feel heroic, but they are transformative. When you move with courage, readiness follows, not as confidence but as capacity. Skills build, clarity sharpens, self-trust grows, you develop resilience not by avoiding mistakes but by surviving them. Purpose isn't something you suddenly arrive at fully formed. It's shaped through engagement, through showing up again and again, especially when it's uncomfortable. Purpose chooses courage over readiness because courage signals willingness. Willingness to learn, willingness to adapt, willingness to be wrong and revise. Readiness says, I'll begin when I'm sure. Courage says, I'll begin and learn who I am by beginning. And that's the truth most people discover too late. You don't get ready and then step into purpose. You step into purpose, and that is what makes you ready. Healing does not ask you to erase what happened to you, even though many of us desperately want it to. We want the memory gone, the ache muted, the chapter deleted so we can move on without carrying its weight. We're encouraged to be positive, to focus on the future, to stop dwelling on the past. But healing is not the absence of pain or memory. It is the willingness to stay present with your experience without denying, minimizing, or rushing it away. Erasure suggests that the goal is to forget, to become someone untouched. Presence recognizes that what shaped you deserves acknowledgement, not because it defines you, but because ignoring it keeps it in control. What we refuse to feel doesn't disappear, it finds other ways to surface. It lives in our bodies as tension, in our relationships as guardedness, and in our choices as fear disguised as logic. Presence is often misunderstood as passivity, but it's an active practice. It's noticing what arises without immediately trying to fix it. It's allowing grief to be grief, anger to be anger, without shaming yourself for having those emotions. When we skip this step and try to leap straight into forgiveness, gratitude, or strength, we unintentionally invalidate our own experience. And self-invalidation is not healing, it's another layer of harm. Being present with pain doesn't mean staying stuck in it. It means creating enough safety within yourself to witness it. Many of us learned early that our emotions were too inconvenient, too intense, or too threatening to be expressed. So we became excellent at compartmentalizing. We function. We achieve, we perform wellness. But presence asks us to slow down and ask, what am I actually feeling right now? And then to let that answer exist without judgment. Healing happens in that allowing. Not in reliving the trauma endlessly, but in letting your nervous system recognize that the danger is no longer happening in the present moment. This recognition doesn't come from logic alone, it comes from embodied awareness. From breathing through the discomfort instead of tightening against it. From naming what hurts rather than pretending it doesn't. Erasure promises relief without work, but it often demands numbness as the price. When we try to erase pain, we don't just silence the hurt, we dampen our capacity for joy, connection, and intimacy. Presence, on the other hand, keeps us open. It teaches us that we can feel deeply and still survive, that emotions rise and fall, that we are not broken for struggling. Presence also means honoring your pace. Healing is not linear, and setbacks are not failures. Some days you'll feel lighter, clearer, almost free. Other days the weight will return without warning. Presence allows both without turning the process into a moral judgment about how well you're doing. It replaces impatience with curiosity. True healing integrates the experience into your story without letting it dominate the narrative. You don't erase who you were, you expand who you are. You learn to carry the memory with less tension, less fear, and more compassion for the version of yourself who survived it. Healing requires presence because presence restores choice. You stop running from yourself and start meeting yourself where you are. And in that meeting, gentle, honest, and grounded, you discover that wholeness was never about forgetting. It was about finally allowing yourself to feel, and therefore, to heal. Growth is often talked about as addition, more skills, more confidence, more clarity, more success. But real growth is usually about subtraction. It demands transformation, which means something has to change, and change means something has to be released. That's the part we resist. We want improvement without loss, evolution without disruption. Yet transformation is not a cosmetic upgrade. It's a reorganization of how you see yourself, how you relate to others, and how you move through the world. Transformation asks for honesty before comfort. It invites you to examine the identities you've clung to because they once kept you safe. The people pleaser, the overachiever, the one who never needs help, the one who stays quiet to keep the peace, these roles often develop as survival strategies. Letting them go can feel dangerous, even when they're no longer serving you. Growth doesn't shame these identities, it simply outgrows them. What makes transformation so unsettling is that it puts you in a liminal space, no longer who you were, not yet who you're becoming. This in-between can feel disorienting. Old habits don't fit, but new ones aren't solid yet. Confidence wavers, direction feels unclear, and it's tempting to retreat to the familiar, even if the familiar kept you small. But this discomfort isn't a sign you're doing something wrong. It's evidence that change is underway. Transformation also changes your relationships. As you grow, you may stop tolerating what you once accepted. You might speak up where you were silent, leave spaces where you once stayed, or ask for more than you ever believed you deserved. Not everyone will celebrate this shift. Some people benefit from your old patterns and will resist your growth, consciously or not. That resistance can feel like rejection, but it's often just a mismatch caused by your evolution. True growth requires grief. Grief for the version of yourself who survived with limited tools. Grief for time spent shrinking. Grief for relationships that can't come with you. We rarely acknowledge this part, yet it's essential. If you don't allow yourself to grieve what you're leaving behind, you may unconsciously recreate it. Transformation isn't about denying the past, it's about honoring it without living inside it. There is also transformation in how you speak to yourself. The inner voice shaped by criticism, urgency, or fear doesn't disappear on its own. Growth means practicing a new internal language, one rooted in accountability and compassion rather than punishment. This shift doesn't happen overnight. It's built through small, consistent choices to respond differently when old triggers appear. Eventually, transformation creates coherence. Your values begin to match your actions. Your boundaries reflect your self-respect. Your choices feel less reactive and more intentional. Life may not become easier, but it becomes clearer. And clarity brings a sense of grounded confidence that doesn't rely on constant approval or comparison. Growth demands transformation because you cannot carry everything forward. Some beliefs, habits, and roles belong to earlier chapters. Keeping them out of fear will only weigh you down. Transformation asks you to trust that who you're becoming can hold more truth, more freedom, and more presence than who you were. growth is not about becoming someone else. It's about becoming more fully yourself, even when that requires change.